In my last video, we talked about the first stages in quitting gambling. Towards the end of that video, I touched upon the triangle of gambling addiction, and I said what I'd do is I'd make a separate video and explain this and explain how it works when it comes to the early stages of recovery. Now, the principle behind the triangle of gambling addiction is very, very powerful, particularly when it comes to the early stages of abstinence, the early stages of recovery. The principle is that there are three factors which allow you or enable you to gamble. And by taking out one, two, or all three of these factors or these sides of the triangle, you're able to prevent yourself from gambling. Now, none of this has anything to do with willpower. I mentioned in my last video how ineffective the reliance on willpower can actually be when it comes to quitting gambling. If you want to watch that video, I'll link it in the description. But basically, what I said was that during the early stages of abstinence, the early stages of recovery, you're normally suffering from what I call a gambling hangover, where you're experiencing the pain from a big loss or the stress of a big loss, and your resolve is particularly strong. So you manage to get through a couple of days using sheer resolve, sheer willpower, and you believe you can rely on this going forward. However, as with a real hangover, the pain will fade and thoughts of gambling will creep back in. Maybe you've done all your money and you couldn't gamble, but eventually you will get paid, or assuming you've got some money coming in from somewhere, you'll be able to gamble again, and the temptation will rear its ugly head. The idea is that you can put measures in place to restrict one or all three of these factors, which then prevent you from actually actively gambling. Now, the three sides of this triangle are money, time, and opportunity. Sometimes you'll see opportunity called location, but I'll explain why I call it opportunity in due course. Now, if we start with money. Now, money is obviously an incredibly important factor. If you don't have money, you can't gamble. Gamblers generally have a very strange attitude towards money, a very strange relationship with money. In the gambler's eyes, money is quite often seen purely as a resource to gamble. And this is why, and this is something again I'll go on to in another video, this is why we often lose the value of money and will actually begrudge spending money on normal everyday things, even if it's a relatively small amount, because we see that money as a resource that enables us to gamble. So we don't want to spend our gambling money on normal things. We want to reserve it purely to feed our addiction, which does lead to sometimes resentment when money is required for family costs, etc., etc. So without money, we can't gamble. At the moment, if you are in the early stages of recovery, this side of the triangle may have already been taken care of. It may be that you've come here off the back of a big loss and you don't have any money. So therefore your triangle is already broken and you're already unable to gamble. We as gamblers know how effective this is. We have all been skint at some point and have been unable to gamble for 3 or 4 days. And surprise, surprise, we're still here. We survived. So we can do it. So if we can continue that theory forward and ensure that we don't have access to money, even when theoretically we normally would have, then we're unable to gamble. I mentioned in my last video about handing over your financial control to a loved one, normally to your spouse or to your parents or to a close relative or even a close personal friend. In the early stages, this may seem a little belittling. It may feel like you're a child again and having your money controlled. It may feel like you're getting pocket money and you have to ask every time you want to go out. And I admit this isn't an ideal solution, but it is a very, very effective one, and it's, I would say, almost a necessity when it comes to the early stages of gambling recovery. The thing to consider is this is still your money. You can still access it when you need it, but what you don't have is unfiltered access to all your money when you have the ability to gamble. Providing you've already had the conversation with this person and explained your addiction, then this really won't cause any problems. They're not going to prevent you from going out and see your friends, or they're not going to prevent you from having money to fill up the car or do whatever it is you need to do or whatever you want to spend your money on. The only reason for putting this measure in place is to prevent you from having full, unrestricted access to all your money and the ability to lose all of that money in one session of gambling. What I generally do is I will ask for money and my wife will then ask for receipts. This isn't a problem. Even in a pub you can get receipts for your beer. Alternatively, what I do, as I mentioned in my last video, is if I'm going out to watch the football and I know I'm going to have 4 or 5 pints, is I'll take enough money to have 5 or 6 pints. That way, I don't worry about being short. I can probably still get a couple of rounds in if I need to, and I'll make sure that I don't have extra money to spend on gambling. So that's the money side of things. One other thing, there are bank accounts now that allow you to prevent gambling transactions from taking place on your account. They will prevent you from depositing money at online casinos or online bookies. So consider getting one of these accounts. I'll put some links in the description below. So let's look at the second side of the triangle. And that side of the triangle is time. Now, my opinion on this side of the triangle may be slightly different to others you've heard. I'm not saying necessarily that mine is the right way, but mine is the way that I've experienced and that I believe actually works. So take my advice, but take it alongside other people's and some professional advice as well. Now, naturally, if you don't have any spare time, then you can't gamble. But as it happens, obviously, we've all got time. We've all got time to gamble. Most of us sleep 6 to 8 hours a night, and so there's time there. Even if we fill our days, there is still going to be an opportunity with which we can gamble. Yes, we're sacrificing something important, but to a gambler, gambling is all important. What you'll hear a lot of people suggest is that the time you spend gambling, you fill with something productive, a constructive activity. For example, if you leave work at 5 o'clock and you go to the bookies for a couple of hours, and that is where you do the majority of your gambling, you'll often hear it suggested that you go to the gym or something similar for those 2 hours. You take up sport, that you do something constructive, something healthy, something active. Now, I agree, this is a brilliant solution, because if you can get two positives out of it, i.e. you're not gambling and you're improving your health through doing something constructive, the people also suggest voluntary work. Again, absolutely brilliant. If you can do that and you can actively maintain that, then that is the ideal solution. But what I will say is this: it doesn't matter exactly what you do. Just do something that's not harmful and, most importantly, is not gambling. If you want to spend those couple of hours you normally spend gambling, playing on Xbox or playing Fortnite or doing whatever, it doesn't really matter in the early stages of recovery. Yes, it would be better spent at the gym, but whatever you do, do something that you enjoy and that you can persevere with. The first time I tried this technique, I tried going to the gym. Now, I'm not a particularly active person. If you've seen any of the videos that I'm in, you can probably see that. I kept it up for about a week, but I hated it. I hated going to the gym. So I stopped going. Then immediately that area of time is back open again, and I'm freely available to gamble. It's almost impossible to fill all of your time, but knock out as much of this side of the triangle as you can. Try and find other things that interest you. I, for example, am making these videos. Now, for me, this is productive in two ways. Firstly, all the time I'm recording these, and although they're particularly amateurish, they still take a hell of a long time to record, edit, process, etc., etc. Also, I'm focusing on quitting gambling because I'm talking to you about it. If I'm talking to you about it, part of my brain won't let me gamble because that would be insanely hypocritical. Again, this isn't enough to overcome the power of the addiction, but it's one more element. It's one more part of the triangle that I've chipped away at and would help restrict my access to gambling. Now, the third side of the triangle I call opportunity. Previously, this used to be called location, and the principle was simple. Basically ensure that you can't go to any location where you're able to gamble. The problem is now, with online casinos and with smartphones, laptops and everything else, gambling is accessible from basically anywhere with a 4G or a Wi-Fi connection. So I've changed this to opportunity. Now, I discussed this a bit more in depth actually in my last video, but what I say is quite simple. Restrict yourself from as many avenues of gambling as you can, even if they're not areas that have typically caused you any problems. I myself, as I explained previously, typically played online slots. That was my biggest poison. When I self-excluded from the online casinos, I found myself then going into bookmakers because the machines were very similar. So what you need to do is prevent yourself from gambling in any guise as quickly as possible. Ultimately, if you prevent yourself from gambling in your normal way, then the addiction will look at other ways in which you can gamble. With bricks and mortar premises, this is reasonably simple. You go in, you ask to self-exclude. Now, virtually every bookmakers, every casino, every bingo hall will have quite a simple self-exclusion form. In my experience, most of them will ask for 2 passport-sized photos. So get these done in advance, because that will save you having to go back at a later date, maybe once the gambling hangover's worn off. These don't need to be professionally done photos. I believe if you just create an A4 sheet of them and print them onto a sheet of photo paper, cut them out, that should suffice. So make sure you self-exclude from all the venues you can physically use. This isn't just the ones you use at the moment, your local bookmakers, your local bingo hall, your local casino, but any that within a reasonable walking or driving distance, because once the addiction takes hold, you will go further and further into further and further lengths to fulfill that addiction. If your gambling addiction is online, then get blocks in place there. Self-exclude from any accounts you currently have for the maximum length of time, and do join a national exclusion scheme such as GamStop. What you could also do for added protection is sign up to any other casinos that you're not currently a member of and then immediately self-exclude for the maximum possible time. This will prevent you from searching around for a new casino to join when the addiction comes calling. So that's the triangle of addiction. Ultimately, if you can fully eliminate one side of that triangle, you cannot gamble. However, no side is completely watertight. It is virtually impossible to completely rid yourself of each side of this triangle. As we know as gamblers, we are particularly scheming, we are particularly dishonest, and we have incredible ingenuity when it comes to finding ways of gambling. So make sure you get rid of enough of all three sides of the triangle so it becomes virtually impossible to gamble when that addiction comes calling. I really hope this helps. Thanks very much to my new subscribers. I had about another half a dozen new subscribers in the last week. It's really appreciated. I appreciate this is a small channel, but if you did like this video or you did find it enjoyable or informative, then please do subscribe. Please do drop me a like, because that does go a long, long way. Hopefully I can reach a few more people and share my experiences. Thanks again for watching, listening, and I'll see you again soon.